All right, everybody, welcome to day 3 of Launchable. Thanks for joining us again this evening. Tonight we have two very special speakers for y'all. First up is David Aronchick. He brings with him a career full of experience defining products at the world's biggest cloud companies. He's currently the Director of Research Development at Protocol Labs, who you may know as the maker of IPFS, Filecoin, and a bunch of exciting new experiments in what it means to build Web3 distributed infrastructure. Today he's going to be talking about approaching Web3 as a cloud native engineer. Please join me in welcoming David. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. Oh, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay. Let me see how to get to this. Is this what we want? Sorry. 2 years in the pandemic, still figuring it out. Can you see my presentation?
Everything's coming through clearly.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Dave Aronchick. I am co-director of research development here at Protocol Labs. Protocol Labs was founded a long time ago, long before Web3 was even a term. In about 2013 is when the first work on IPFS was checked in, and it's been going ever since. Protocol Labs as an organization has really grown and flourished. We have tons of different open source projects that you're welcome to use. They're all like MIT licensed. We would love people to build on them, use them, fork them, whatever makes sense. And they really span the spectrum of different technologies that you'll use, not just in Web3, but in Web 2 and before. We have things called like DRAND, which allows for distributed randomness, libp2p for poking through firewalls and connecting to systems all over the world. Obviously IPFS, and then, which is different than Filecoin. Filecoin is our incentive layer that sits on top of IPFS. But in many ways, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about Web3. And it's not just Web3, obviously, it's Web3, many exclamation points. But one of the things that we have the biggest problems around is even defining what Web3 is today. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any question the hype has gotten far ahead of what's useful and what we're actually doing. So this talk is about Web3 for cloud native folks. Now, I myself am a deep cloud native person. I was the first non-founding PM on Kubernetes, which I then led on behalf of Google for 3 years. I started Kubeflow, which is a web framework, or excuse me, a cloud native framework for doing distributed machine learning and training on top of Kubernetes. I built the same project, which is a Jupyter and a notebook efficiency thing that allows Kubeflow, but many other platforms as a backend as well. So, I really come from that cloud native world. And, I joined Protocol Labs about 6 months ago. And in a lot of ways, these questions were the ones that were the first that jumped out at me. Why the heck are we doing this, and what are we trying to achieve? So to start, let's tell a story, right? And by the way, I can't see, oh, here, can I get chat? Oh, there we are. Okay. To start, you say you want to build an app, and let's tell a little story. There's an app out there with a killer idea. They have unprecedented resource and connectivity needs. They need to be globally distributed, and they need critical performance. So in order to get this thing out the door, they need to source and provision, all this compute, create mechanisms for sharing and deploying code at velocity. They need to use internet standards, and they need to ship and maintain their app in a highly leveraged way. And today, unfortunately, the only way to do this is with a centralized service, or the only thing that they saw was available for them was a centralized service. Anyone want to guess what year I'm describing? Any guesses? So here's the hint. Anyone know what this is? Come on. That one? All right. It's Google. And the question is, how did Google build Google? Well, the first thing they did was ship something, anything, right? Nothing sitting under that table was decentralized in any remote way. It was a thing. It was a bunch of boxes with commodity hardware and so on. And then over time, they began to decentralize one at a time. They broke up this large monolithic thing into many components. They built a orchestration layer called Borg, which ended up becoming Kubernetes. Kubernetes was a distant relative of. I mean, they still use Borg today. They have many, many different components, but you can go back and read any of the original research on Dapper and MapReduce and other things like that. They published many papers around like real innovations to enable some of this decentralization. They built all these components one at a time, gradually, having very clear processes for how to roll things out one at a time, exponential releases and so on. And then they started getting really crazy, right? They built, replaced proprietary hardware with, handwritten ones. They built their own chips, laid their own undersea cables, and lots more. But at the start, they just started with this centralized service and the tools that were available for them today. And the reason I bring that up is because so many people in the Web3 space today think that, it's a new world. We need to do everything, from scratch, from the bottoms up. And the fact is that's not true, not even remotely. And doing that is in a lot of ways like building a house on sand, because so many of these components are moving around constantly that you are going to risk building on something that, next week could be, rug pulled, or you could have your entire flow change because the API changes. Nobody's even developed senses of stability or releases or norms around this stuff. And I joke about this, but here you can see at every decade we've had these huge shifts, right? In the 90s, things might have looked like this. 2000s, it looked like this. 2010s and 2020s. And in each segment, each one of these things, dramatically changed. Now, that said, does that mean here in 2020 we're not using raids? Of course not, right? You pick and choose, and a raid is a perfectly reasonable solution for some things, and you would go off and do it. Does that mean that we've eliminated all tables in our state store? Of course not. We choose something that makes sense to us, and we pick where it is. Every state store isn't using a graph database, right? You figure out what you use and move from there. And this is a thing to implore all of you to pick and choose the things that make sense. Web3 is one path for what's next. And in many ways, Web3 impacts every single one of those rows as well. Do I know exactly what the world will look like when I add the column there for 2030? Of course not. And instead of being a maximalist, I strongly recommend that there are plenty of places where Web3 plugs in with very specific use cases, but you want to be very judicious and only choose it where it makes sense to you. So that's a little bit of the why, right? We are in a new platform. I'm a huge fan of the platform, and there are lots of opportunities at every one of those layers to use something. And it's just a matter of, picking and choosing it to be smart. So I kind of jump forward because it's what is Web3 then? If it's all these components that you can pick and choose, whatever, how do you get there? And I start with this, right? Cloud native apps are great. And they are, of course. I love them. Here's what a cloud native app looks like today. Here with one command, I can spin up an entire Kubernetes cluster. Then I download and install Helm, which is a package manager for Kubernetes. And then I deploy a sock shop app, which is a multi-tier app that has a shopping cart and a storage, state store, payment processing, everything built in. And presto, I'm done, right? You can now take your money from your customers, as easy as that. That's really powerful, except in doing that, you have to trust all of these people, right? the Linux API, or excuse me, the AWS, you have to trust Linux, you have to trust Kubernetes authors, containerd, you have GPU makers, network switch makers, blah, 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 right? It just goes on and on. And, you know, as beautiful as that top level was, it does imply a lot of trust that many people are not comfortable with. So, you know, what Web3's summary is really about is, who do you trust? And the answer might be no one, which is fine if you're Fox Mulder. 90s reference there for you. The problem is that you want to come out and build everything yourself and really trust no one, congratulations. This is a very small list of the things that you have to go and build yourself from scratch and know every single line of code, right? So that's not realistic either. At some point, you're going to have to trust somebody. But the entire point of Web3 is we now have a much clearer infrastructure and set of systems to figure out and pick and choose who you trust. And so if you say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to reinvent DNS. I'm okay with the system as it exists today. Great. You can check that box off. I know how to do DNS. It's web, whatever, Web 1, but it works. So great. I'm moving on. But, you know, it turns out I don't trust cryptographic libraries, so I'm going to swap those out and use them on my own. Web3 really is an unprecedented, gives you an unprecedented level of ability to pick and choose what makes sense to you. And like I said, my number one recommendation is pick and choose in kind of the reverse. Start by trusting everyone. I promise you, GCP, Azure, AWS, they're not going to, you know, within reason, they're not going to do anything bad to you, right? Like they have so many billions of dollars tied up in being trusted partners, they're fine. That said, start swapping out things as it makes sense to you. For example, you know, my company, you could swap out what, you know, how you store disk or how you store archival data. We're great for that. And then you could swap that out, save money, and move on. Okay, so choose wisely. So that's what Web3 is. It really is all about the ability to pick and choose your trust. How do you go about this? Well, you know, in this way, you can look at something like this, right? Your end user contacts DNS. There may be a context at front end with your shopping cart. The shopping cart is going to need to connect to an auth service, a CDN service, a search service. Maybe you roll them your own, or maybe you use like a centralized repo or a centralized service for that, a SaaS for that. Gosh, it really is going slow here. I'm sorry. Or it's slow on my anyway. Then you connect to a backend, which might have a payment processor, state storage, and log file service, right? Very, very basic app. Just about every app in the world looks not unlike this. Shopping cart app in the world looks not unlike this, right? Which is great. Now, the good news is that Web3 has a solution for each one of these. Like I said, every single one of these components is Web3 available today. Now, that said, would you trust all of Web3 to do all these things? Of course not. Do not trust Web3 to do all these things, please. It is not built for this yet. The latency, the profile, the SLAs are not there. Centralized services do a good job for a reason. The key is to pick and choose based on your need what makes sense to you. So, for example, let's say you need immutable image hosting and you want it to be significantly cheaper than, you know, on a CDN or AWS. Well, you could use a service like nft.storage, right? Stores forever, gives you a terabyte for free, off you go. You could, let's say you want to improve your content delivery speed. Cloudflare offers a solution. I can't tell. I can't tell what's going on. My animations are not rendering properly. I don't know why. Sorry. There we go. So you could use Cloudflare distributed web gateway. They're fantastic. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't at least put a pitch in for mine. You need extremely large permanent storage. IPFS is wonderful. That we're about 1,000 times cheaper than AWS Glacier, for example. Let's say you need a publicly auditable database. OrbitDB is a great solution for that. And I already mentioned libp2p, wonderful for edge deployments, runs on Raspberry Pi hardware, breaks through firewalls, knock yourself out, right? So in each of these cases, I'm able to very specifically choose a problem I'm having and swap it out for a solution that's better than the solution that's out there today, for some measure of better. And that measurement is really important too. Like, you need to know why you're swapping this out. If cost is a big problem, then great, go this cost way. If performance is a problem, then you need to go to the performance way. It's not about the Web3. It's not about being religious or a maximalist in any way. Pick and choose the things that make the most sense to you. Okay, so tech changes, people don't. Gosh, it's really hard. I don't know why my computer is being so finicky. And so I like to throw this slide up here because I think this is genuinely the truth. And at the end of the day, if you're building, these are pretty immutable laws, right? Number one, people do not want to run their own infrastructure, and they never will. Now, they could, if absolutely forced into for some reason, but if they could hand off that infrastructure to run exactly the way they want, with the exact cost profile and security profile and so on, then great, they will. But the idea of me carrying a pager because my hard drives failed at 2 o'clock in the morning is miserable. I've done it. I don't ever want to do it again. I am much happier having a Google Cloud employee be paged and going and fixing something or moving VMs to another region. Two, people want control, but only when they want it, right? Like, if the system by default works great, then they're happy. Now they get pissed when they can't run it exactly like they want, and that's oftentimes why they go back to number one and roll their own infrastructure and things like that. But when you think about building your own platform or your own app or whatever it might be, think about ways to constrain control. Think about ways to make the default wonderful. Think about having very clear interfaces for how to add or offer control. But at the default, you really need to think through that user experience and have it be great. Third, people want to save money. Pretty immutable. Now, that's not to say that people won't spend if they're not meeting 1 and 2, right? If they need more control or they need particular performance or whatever, of course they'll spend money. But given 2 scenarios that are exactly the same, they'll want to save it. So your ability to control costs and make things cheaper than anything else will always be a draw. And then finally, people want the easiest solution that solves their needs and no more, right? They do not want, kitchen sinks. They do not want endless feature flags. They do not want, oh, this works, but you have to go and patch this particular thing. That's a nightmare. If they can get an easy solution that's out of the box that's perfect for them, then home run. My favorite example of this is Heroku, which did very well. Just giving people like a lockdown stack that just was absolutely perfect. And even today, people, reference the Heroku experience as being the premium. For $5 a month, I was able to spin up an entire stack and do this entire thing wonderfully. I really curse the day that Salesforce, kind of moderated their investment because I really still miss it. And a lot of people still do. Anyhow, so that's how. So let's go back to why again. So setting up a Web3 cluster, like I said, you can today set up a Web3 cluster extremely easily. You do that same Kubernetes thing, you go install Helm. Here is a Helm chart for setting up an IPFS cluster. IPFS has multiple types. You have the public IPFS, but then you also have IPFS with the same primitive, same everything, same consensus that you can run on your own private cluster if you'd like. And that's what this is here. Now, again, there are lots of things, lots of subtlety there. I note your comment in the chat. I'll get to that at the end. It's subtle. But at the end of the day, you can see here, you can install this. By the way, this is just a third-party one. We don't have a public one today. We're working on that. We will have one shortly, Helm chart for setting up IPFS. But there you go. So it is very easy to get it going. And with that, you can now have a rich, storage interface for, that gives you all the benefits of IPFS, globally distributed, proof of space-time, reliability, on and on and on. And it works with Kubernetes or any of your cloud native architecture today. So that is absolutely available. Should you, that's up to your customer's needs. If you are perfectly fine with a single VM and you're backing your S3 bucket up to Glacier on a nightly basis, that's great. Home run. Don't go anywhere. I know that's weird, me telling you not to use my company stuff. Don't do it. you're fine. I promise you, you're fine. But the moment you start running into your customers' needs, your business needs, whatever it might be, that's when it's time to explore. So if you're not getting the kind of uptime, or your storage costs are through the roof, or your egress costs are through the roof, like that's an opportunity for you to say like, geez, okay, now's the time to investigate. And Web3 does offer many of these things. And there are really solid components here that, are well outside of, the DeFi, speculative madness that you can use today that really make a big difference. Again, I'm highly biased here. Protocol Labs has been around for 9 years. With this technology is well battle tested, and it's got a lot of great use cases today. And it's up to you to decide whether or not to use it. Web3 is one tool in the toolbox, of course, and it's built in with that flexibility. But at the end of it, it's all about trust and decentralization. And so, with that, I'd like to wrap up and just start taking questions. So let me start with the. I'm going to leave that up so you can reference it as long as you like. There we are. So you asked the question about whether or not Filecoin is private, IPFS is private. It is not, but there are many solutions out there for storing private data on it. There are programs called, there are many protocols called Lit protocol and other things like that. This is something that we're very actively pursuing right now, like trying to figure out what the first-class primitives are for how to store and maintain your data on there. But for now, your best bet is, write your data, encrypt it as it stands, and maintain your own keys, and then push it out. One of the biggest reasons that we are not encrypting it is because the truth is without very sophisticated stuff, which we're investigating, called privacy preserving frameworks or multi-party compute, it's effectively impossible to keep things private at a distance without them being like completely locked. And that's why our recommendation is, everything end to end is secure, of course. It's all HTTPS and cryptographically secure. And we know, within 100 billionth of a point or whatever, whether or not anyone has attempted to transfer or tamper with your data. And if they do, we immediately slash them. So that is secure. What's not secure is at some point, they can look in, by looking at memory and things like that, and see the content that you have. And so that's why we recommend you maintaining your own keys and security. What else? I have incredibly kind comments. Thank you all. I really am happy to answer any random questions. Just dive in.
Yeah, so I can help point some of these out. I've got some questions, but before I jump in there, one in chat is from Anir. What are the top Web3 infrastructure projects you're following right now, and why?
Boy, I'll be honest with you. I certainly pay attention to a lot of stuff, and I don't want to in any way besmirch anyone. There's a lot of hype out there, and I will never speak ill of anyone. It's just not in my DNA. There are some really great things out there that are built on kind of the next layer up. So at Filecoin, for example, right now we're working on a project called Bakao Yao. You're welcome to jump into one of these Slacks and ping me. I could show it to you. It's very, very early, but it's the concept of computing over data, which is fine, and I'm very excited about that. But what's more exciting are the people that are coming along and building on top of it. So, for example, there's a company called Kudos, that CUDOS, which is doing distributed frame rendering for images and pictures and things like that. There's a company called Charity Engine, which allows you to run, much like SETI at home, run compute on your local node and have that be donated to whatever protein folding and other things like that. You might have heard of SETI at home or protein folding at home, kind of next generation of that. And there are lots more out there. I don't, like I said, unfortunately, I'm kind of heads down just working on my thing. Don't take that as there aren't really great things out there. There are. But I just am never up to speed. And because there's so much noise, again, I'm not going to speak ill of anyone, but there is a lot of noise out there. It's just hard for me to pay attention when, I have a full-time job. That said, like when I just was at East Denver, and I must have seen, 30 presentations over the course of 2 days. And I was just floored with how much like creativity, for as much as people have problems with the space, and there are plenty of problems, something here is going to win. A few things are actually going to win. I don't know what those are, but they absolutely are out there. And so it's kind of up to you to pick and choose what your needs are and then go after them.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was wondering from your talk, you did a great job of kind of sketching out this super deep stack or tall stack. I don't know which direction it goes of technology that we're building on top of. And I also come from a time where we're used to the trust inherent in building on top of that stack, and now there's this new choice that we all have to make. And anyone like me hasn't been trained in making that choice. Are there any maybe good examples or anecdotes of folks who've made a smart decision about where to put Web3 into their product to some?
Boy, that's a really interesting one. So I'll be honest with you. I don't think there are phenomenally great cases right now, because I think it's so early. You can find lots of startups talking about building on Web3 and doing really interesting things. So again, one from my space is a company called Skiff, skiff.org. They offer private note-taking, basically like think Google Docs, but you maintain the key. So, not even Google could go and look at it. Really neat idea. And it's all built, candidly speaking, built on IPFS and Filecoin. But it's that kind of thing that's phenomenal. I don't, at the end of the day, we have many users, right? Millions and millions of users. We have about 15 exabytes of space on Filecoin as a whole, which is just a mind-bogglingly large amount. And so you have customers all up and down the spectrum. That said, it doesn't even remotely solve all storage needs. I would never recommend it. It is, what I like to joke about it is, it's very similar to kind of very cheap hard drives, right? Like imagine you had a hard drive that was, 2,000 RPM, right? Forget SSD, forget NVMe, talk about something like that slow. Is that useless? Of course not. Would I store a database on it? Of course not, right? Like it's up to you to say like, oh, hey, there's this category of things, hosting, image files or log files or whatever. That's perfect for that. Let's have that out there. And that's the way to kind of approach it. So, my take is we have lots of case studies out there on the website. You can go check them out and see lots of examples. There are lots of other ones out there, right? Like I said, for everything, there's some form of Web3 company that's out there doing really cool things. Helium is doing like, distributed networking especially for IoT devices. You have, I don't know, there's just millions. I hesitate to even start listing them because I'm going to leave some off. But the net of it is that I do highly recommend you go and explore, figure out what your SLAs are, right? Your service level agreements or your SLOs, service level commitments. Say like, okay, we need a RPC call to go from the front end to the back end and back to the front in 10 milliseconds with a tail latency of 90 milliseconds, right? Great. That's my profile. Figure out what your profile is and say like, oh, if that doesn't work, things break down. From that perspective, now within that constraint, you can either redesign your front end to make it faster, slower, whatever, and have different SLAs or SLOs, or you can look at your back end and say it's performing well, but it's too costly, or it's not performing well. I'm going to go invest in a new stack, things like that, and basically pick and choose. But I would never recommend a startup today betting entirely on Web3. There's just too much stuff there. Start with a prototype, something you can whip out on a weekend in cloud native, or maybe even, Web 1.0 technology, spin up a VM. And then as you begin to figure out where you need flexibility and customizability and so on, you start to swap that components out.
So maybe this is related. Sometimes when I hear people talking about why they're building Web3 or why they're using Web3 technologies, they focus on the keyword ownership.
Yeah.
As in, like, in the Web3 world, users will get to own the services that they use every day.
Yeah.
How are ownership and trust related? Is that a way to think about?
Oh, absolutely. Decision? Absolutely. I don't want to like dismiss stuff as being a bill of goods, but like I said, at some point you're going to have to trust someone, right? For example, let's take communication over, SSL, right? The encrypted network that goes end to end. It is freaking hard to set up a self-signed cert and distribute that and have a cert signed infrastructure and so on. It is much easier to buy a cert or use a cert from Let's Encrypt or whatever and go from there. Congratulations, you started trusting someone else, right? Now, ownership is kind of the same way, right? Like, yes, it'd be nice if, random company, Bookface decides to store all my data for me and crawl me around the web and all that kind of stuff. Sure, it'd be nice if they didn't do that. The amount of work involved in actually blocking that is so painfully large, it's difficult to imagine. And, even the idea of me owning my data is really hard for me to wrap my head around. I'm skeptical, right? Like, I am David Aronchick. I am blah, blah, blah years old. I live at blah, 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 blah. Sorry, that's just out there. Like, there's no way to lock that down. And I could say, like, hey, you can't use this unless you ask me. But guess what? The city registrar or the city, county that like has my mortgage on file knows it. It's a fact. So does that mean I own it? I don't know. Yes, I very much love a world in which I could get paid for my data. And several folks out there are doing some really interesting things that I'm hopeful around. I like Brave a lot, the browser. Who knows how big they get, but they have this whole concept of the basic attention token where like I actually get paid for seeing an ad. It's a cute idea, right? And they become a gateway for showing the ad. They have to block all the other ads, which is very interesting. I mean, they have to give you the option to block all these other ads, and then they're the ones who become the ad provider, but everything goes through them. So it's a more constrained way of allowing for that. That said, if Bookface decided to, figure out a way around that, they could do it in about 21 seconds. So like, the moment that it became a problem, they're going to work around that. And that's why I'm just, deeply skeptical because there's no central authority and because facts are facts. It's very hard for me to imagine a world where this is transformatively unlocked. I'm hopeful, and your point is correct. Web3, I think, offers a real path to explore it. I just don't know how it happens in where it's just not an incredibly leaky sieve.
That's one of the reasons that it's exciting to be kind of working on startups in the space, because we're in a time of experimentation. I don't think, we don't know where it's going to lead or where solutions are going to come from. You were kind of talking about the bill of goods that you're at risk of being sold operating in this new space.
Yeah.
One of the immutable laws you shared is that people want to save money. I'm kind of starting to feel like in this world, the law is switching to people want to make money by using your service.
Yeah.
How do you see that dynamic playing out? I know, Filecoin is an incentive mechanism. Lots of these new systems have some sort of incentive mechanism built in to try and, jumpstart network effects. How should we be thinking about that and any potential dangers that lie behind that?
I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, this incentive structure is really, really sensitive. You got to be so careful around it. I would not have left Microsoft, a company that is quite wonderful. I really have nothing evil to say about it. In fact, my former boss is on this very call, and even if he wasn't on this call, I would still say good things about it. But at the end of it, like, it is, I wouldn't have joined a company where the token was a means to an end, right? Or excuse me, a token was the end in itself. I would only join a company where it was a utility. And the truth of it is, for me, there's no way that I read all the papers, read everything. There's no way to achieve what we have achieved without crypto and some of the Web3 primitives. And by that, what I mean is, when a storage provider on IPFS takes a file and holds that file, we automatically, over epochs, release coin to them automatically. And we do that via cryptographic proofs. So we look at the file, we hash the file using unique randomness, and figure out, like, okay, this person clearly still has the file because we forced them to prove it. And when they're done proving it, we can release a certain amount. That's a really hard thing to do without this kind of like cryptographic structure we have in place today. Outside of that, you could do it, but it would require a lot of work, and work that's not terribly valuable. So that was, for me, like, I was like, okay, this is a utility token. It serves a very clear purpose, and a big fan. There are plenty of other things. There was another storage provider out there who forked our code, or at least took our proofs anyway, which is fine. Again, we are all MIT licensed. You can fork our code and go nuts. But they took our proofs and our data. They built basically the same as IPFS, except they store nothing. They write nothing. They write garbage, and then rely on you to store this garbage for a certain amount of time, and then pay you for storing the garbage. Much like other coin providers have proof of work. This is proof of space-time, except with garbage data. Again, enjoy. That's a way to earn it. Unfortunately, in that case, that coin is the end. It never provides value. It only just basically executes and stores this thing, and then it just becomes a speculative asset. Could it turn into other things over time? Possibly, but certainly the philosophy is there. So for me, I'm pretty sensitive to that, and I wouldn't go into this space without a larger mission in place. And Filecoin, with really solving a real problem, a distributed storage problem that a lot of people have. This is something that, like, 5 weeks into the me leading Kubernetes was like, hey, we should probably try and solve this, and we still haven't really. So that was the thing. Second, we at Filecoin are deeply committed to green. So we have Filecoin green. You can go and check our dashboards. We schedule storage and reward storage, and allow you to schedule your storage based on how green the space is. We have all these investments in this that we hope to encourage use of renewable energy and things like that. Because at the end of the day, people are going to store things. It's just a matter of where they do it. And so our hope is that we can encourage it to be in the greenest possible place. And not just that, we at Filecoin and Protocol Labs, our dream is to create the next Bell Labs and really unlock a lot of amazing innovation in the future that goes far beyond storage. It'll take us time to get there, but that's certainly where we are today. So at the end of it, I think my summary answer to your question is, you got to be diligent about it. You got to look at the systems and processes and so on, and the philosophy behind these companies, because like I said earlier, the signal and noise is pretty brutal.
Agreed. We're in our last couple minutes here with Dave. If you've got more questions, now is the time to drop them. We've got one from Mayor. He asks, what's a common Web3 dApp tech stack that is being followed in the space right now?
What's a common one? There really isn't one today. Like I said, it's mostly pick and choose the ones that work for you. And, that's as far as it goes. I wish I could say like, oh, this is the one that everyone's building on, like, Rails or Django or something like that. There just isn't anything that's universal today. There are plenty of them out there that kind of pick and choose and let you swap things in and out. But even doing something like executing a RPC call against the network right now is so brutal relative to Web 1. Not in a bad way. It's just, if you try and replicate the experience you have on Web 1 in Web 3, you're gonna have a bad time. You need to have other solutions to meet the same SLAs that you had previously.
And I've got a question here from Corentin, who asks, how are today's Web3 technologies scaling over time? As far as I know, there are usually mechanisms to append, but nothing to delete.
Yeah, it goes back to my encryption thing earlier. At the end of the day, Web3 is about, one of the things about trust that's in Web3 is also about the lack of trust. And so in every possible case, sadly, and we need to have the systems that fix this, but in every possible case, you need to assume that everything you do is untrusted. And so the only way to do that is you can never guarantee that anyone's going to delete. And that's why you need to maintain your own keys, because if they have, encrypted data, then that's the same as garbage, assuming you're using strong encryption. So we have in Filecoin and IPFS the ability to issue deletes, but there's no guarantee that the storage provider will do it. We work with untrusted storage provider. Very trusted storage providers, and we're very, very proud of the many thousands of people who are storing things. But at the end of the day, there's no requirement. Like they won't be ejected if they don't delete. So I cannot stress enough. You need to own the problem yourself for now, and do that via, owning the encryption.
Well, thank you so much, David. I think we've reached the end of our time with you, and I appreciate you coming by to share your wisdom. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. And please do jump in any of those things you see on the screen. And let me know if you have any questions. And I'm always happy to help. So please let me know. We at Protocol also, I should be remiss in saying, we're always looking for great startups as well. So we have a very large ecosystem arm, funding arm, partnership arm, and we're more than happy to help folks get going and with grants and things like that. So thanks again.
Awesome. So coming up next, we have Soufia Trabelsi. She is the Web3 gaming lead at Polygon Studios. They help partners build large-scale NFT gaming and metaverse projects, focusing on the Polygon protocol. Today, she's going to be talking about trends in the Web3 gaming ecosystem. Please welcome Soufia.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. Okay, so I'm in South by. If you guys hear a lot of music, it's because it's crazy outside. But yeah, super happy to be here. Thanks for setting it up. I don't know what Dave presented, but my presentation is going to be more focused on like content from what I have to say. So it's not that I was lazy with the presentation. I actually just have a lot to say, and it just didn't make sense to put it all on the presentation. Okay, so I'll start start sharing. So yeah, I'm just figuring out how to make this wider. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, all good. So my name is Sophia. I'm the Web3 gaming lead at Polygon Studios. What that means is that I basically interact with the Web3 games that are currently in the ecosystem, sort of provide them with the tools for success. So we work with a lot of Web3 gaming projects, you know, all the way from AAA studios to the sort of like indie developer in their garage. And I think I can like just honestly and confidently say that at this point, we deal with everyone equally in the sense that it's very early on, and anyone that's joining Polygon, we like to work with them very, very closely. So that's part of what I do. The other part of what I do is so looking for like kind of like the next good game. So that's basically me spending a lot of time on social media, interacting with different DAOs, different communities, just to kind of source the up and coming projects. Of course, we do get projects that come directly on Polygon, but also for the projects that you know, might have some questions about Polygon or are not sure, or, you know, didn't even consider that. So that would also be kind of my job, would be to look for them and to onboard them to Polygon Studios. So I wanted to start out this presentation with the definition of Web3 because it's a very abstract term. It doesn't, there's no one definition for it. It's still very philosophical. So I wanted to start off with that. So Web3, and this is from Wikipedia, which we all know is a trusted source, right? So, all right. Web3 is an idea for a new iteration of World Wide Web based on blockchain technology, which incorporates concepts such as decentralization and token-based economics. So this is an interesting one. I would say the last sort of, you know, statement is an interesting one, which is that it incorporates decentralization and token-based economics. So like, what does that mean exactly, decentralization? Well, with all the open protocols that we have right now, I mean, I would say like starting, you know, like being a creator right now, or like thinking about doing a game has never been easier. Honestly, like most of the work is like done already. Most of the contracts are open source. Anyone can go read them. In terms of like the documentation we have at Polygon, we there's a plethora of information there as well. So I think it's probably the easiest time to like make that sort of transition. That's not really about decentralization, and I'll talk about that more during the presentation. Okay, so kind of what is unique about Web3 versus Web2? Like what kind of, so if we say Web3, like how does that differentiate it from a Web2 game? Token-based economy. So essentially all the projects that come in usually want to have like their own token. And then they want to have like NFT assets. So like digital assets, either like as for pre-sales to raise money, or, you know, their in-game assets. And then there's a salary economy for that. So yeah, it's an interesting model because it gives a lot of power to the project. So they could also raise through their tokens. So if they do like an IDO, that's an initial DEX offering, they don't have to go to the VCs anymore to collect money and to, you know, prove credibility. Again, sort of back to that reference to the indie developers in their garage. It is difficult to go out there and kind of be on the spot and raise money. So doing IDOs is a lot more, I would say, democratic for everyone involved. And it also like shifts the power back to the creators. What I've noticed, you know, in terms of trends, if you guys find this interesting, is that they'll go and raise on 4 to 5 different IDO platforms. And that's kind of another thing that's interesting about the space, is like this idea of cross marketing. So like just by being on the IDO, they do get some form of marketing from the IDO. So like it's them going on their socials saying that project X is raising this amount. So if you do that over, you know, across different platforms, it does sort of have like this snowball effect, which is always a good thing to get your name out there. The second point is probably my favorite point, and like what I respect the most in like Web3 gaming and like just in Web3 in general, is the ownership of assets. And this is like a really, really important point, because you actually get to own anything that you purchase through the game, or any sort of assets you create during the game. Everything is pointing to your address, so it's kind of like playing Monopoly and like being able to cash like your like Monopoly money. That would be like the closest reference to that. And I think that's really crucial. And I think that's why people are inspired by that. Like the fact that if you invest a lot of time in the game, then, like the asset are yours. And like, this is something that no one can ever take away from you. So I think there's a lot of sort of emotional value in that. The other part is that there's a seller creator economy. So because you do get to own your assets, there are marketplaces, so secondary marketplaces where you can resell your assets if you no longer want to keep them, or the game mechanics change and all of a sudden like there's a lot of speculation and you can make more money from that. Whatever it is, there's sort of like the seller creator economy that's emerging in the space, that's allowing gamers to essentially monetize their assets in a very sort of free way. The other one is an interesting one. It's the DAO structure. So what I've seen from most games is that they have sort of a structure where if you hold, tokens, then you kind of have a say on what goes on in the game, or sort of like future improvements, because you are a token holder, and as a result, you are a shareholder. So you do get a bit of kind of power into what goes on, decision-making power on like what goes on. Like obviously it's limited, but that kind of doesn't exist at all with Web2 games. So this is sort of like another interesting, unique distinguisher. So I will. Okay, so the other interesting one is play to earn versus play and earn. I think a lot of people know sort of Web3 gaming through this play to earn kind of buzzword, or like buzz sentence that's been going on. So essentially this kind of means that you're playing to earn. So I think this phrase appeals more to investors, because when you say that you're playing to earn, that means that you're not interested necessarily about the game or the game mechanics. It's more so the reward and the earning potential that you get by playing the game and interacting with their assets. So this one is more of an investor one. It's very volatile, and like most coins that are in play to earn sort of games are very volatile as well, because if there's the reward incentive and the earning incentive is not good anymore, then they tend to like stay away from the game, and then obviously it's their token. So but what has been going on recently is that because the quality is getting better, I think when Web3 games started, like obviously everyone kind of noticed that it looked like a circa 94, 95, game. And like that's kind of unacceptable, because we have come so far in terms of the tech stack and the design, and so it's kind of like confusing that after all this time we would kind of revert and like start producing the quality that was there with the initial Web3 games. So but because the quality is getting a lot better, there is now free to play for Web3 games. So there's a free to play version, and essentially what that means is that this is a sign of confidence that without that Web3 layer, that these games would be just as acceptable. And that if you chose, or if you wanted to have that Web3 layer kind of sitting on top, so having, all the benefits that come with that, then that's kind of an additional layer. So because I would say like 30 to 40% of the games that I've seen so far are incorporating free to play, there is this new buzzword, which is play and earn. Which is very different from play to earn. So play and earn means that you're playing and you're also enjoying your game. So everyone can see where my Uber ride is going today. Anyways, I wasn't able to put it full screen. All right, so with play and earn, I think this kind of alludes more to gamers versus investors. And I think this is kind of like the goals that we want to have in the Department of Gaming, which is, moving from an investor's economy to a gamer's economy. And I think in terms of, volatility, that would kind of stabilize things, just because, if the game is good, like they're gonna stay there, you know, like whether it's a bull market or a bear market, it just kind of depends on the quality of the game. So a lot of emphasis is being put right now into the quality of the games. So I wanted to discuss some challenges as well. I mean, obviously not everything can be rosy. It is the future, but with that, there are some challenges that need to be addressed to kind of, you know, accommodate that and get more people to come to Web3. So one of the biggest points is education, like just educating people about Web3 and like Web3 games. I think, you know, from what I've noticed, and I think, and like all you guys like have a different experience with that, like people that are not necessarily techie are very intimidated by the space just because they assume that you need like some kind of degree in crypto to kind of navigate through everything that's going on. So I think one of the big challenges would be to sort of educate the people that are not, you know, like in that sort of like crypto cult, sort of like the outsiders, and, you know, giving them the tools and information for them to feel comfortable to sort of make that leap, I think is going to be crucial. But I mean, I think we're doing a good job. There's a lot of courses right now, and sort of like what's going on, like more technical courses like Solidity, but like also just in general, like what is Web3, like what is blockchain. I remember when I started out.
I was through
Okay, I don't think that was for me. I remember when I started in Web3, so I graduated in aerospace engineering, and while I was in aerospace, I started dabbling into like crypto Web3. I don't like the word crypto, but like back then, like there was no Web3, it was just called crypto, like on a developer end. So I started out as a Solidity developer. So this is like circa 2017, 18. And like at the time, I remember like it was not like as romanticized as it was today. The literature was very, you know, this is the protocol and this is, you know, there was no like romanticizing what it was. And I think that was a good thing for me because that kind of pushed me to want to go and engage directly with the protocol, you know, like through my terminal. But I think today the infrastructure is in such a way where it's easier for people to want to learn about it. So yeah, this is one of the most important points. The other point we kind of touched on already is the quality of the games, which, you know, is not the best. So the challenge is that we're not doing a good job right now, but let's do a better job. And from what I've seen, you know, good games don't take 3 to 6 months. You know, it's really a big project. Anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years is usually the time to have like a good MVP for like a top quality game. So I think over time, like for like maybe the next 15 to 20 months, the quality is going to be getting a lot better. So that should, you know, kind of allude to the actual gamers to be incentivized to make that leap to Web3. The other challenge is lack of technical or non-technical support for Web2 studios. What I've noticed is that there have been a lot of, you know, studios, you know, IP legacy holders that, you know, necessarily have done great in web, like sort of in the Web2 world, you know, super successful, like financially, socially, you know, brandable names, and they just feel that this is kind of the Wild West, like Web3 is the Wild West, like it's El Dorado, like no one knows how do you apply that success, or like how do you translate that success into Web3. And so like you need someone to kind of guide you through that, because I mean, having like an in-house team is great. And I think this is where I'm going to be touching later about Polygon Studios, because this is where we kind of solve that piece of the puzzle. So yeah, but it's still relevant, obviously. If you're successful in one area in life and then all of a sudden there's this new thing and then you don't really know how to translate it to that. So that would be something of a challenge. The last challenge that I have proposed is complex UX. So the user onboarding right now is kind of difficult because you still have to like just mesh with the current tools, so like MetaMask, bridges. You know, it's kind of complicated. I mean, I'm a crypto native, like a degen, so like I don't mind bridging my coins and, you know, doing all that, but I can't possibly expect that from like my next door neighbor. And I can't expect them to do that just because like I really believe in the quality and like that should be my argument. So the complex user onboarding has distanced a lot of people away from Web3 just because, you know, it's complicated and they have no idea what they're doing. And, you know, there's a lot of scams out there as well. So that's just one thing that I think is going to be a major focus, is just how to make it easier for non-crypto natives to like be able to interact with Web3 games, or just like Web3 applications in general, I guess. So what is the future for Web3? So this is what we're working on a lot in Polygon to sort of like ensure that and to create the infrastructure to accommodate that, so that when the quality does get a lot better, that we're here to sort of welcome that and be able to work with anyone that, you know, is at that level. So you can't have a good game if your game's not streamed. That's, if you ask any gamer, like that's a fact. If your game's not being streamed, if you don't have a community around your game, then it's not the most popular game. So like we've seen on Twitch with Fortnite, you know, millions and millions of viewers. So why doesn't that kind of apply to Web3 games? I mean, so the answer to that is kind of, you know, about everything that we've talked about already. But yeah, so the future of Web3 games is getting Web3 games streamed and getting them streamed by like the top 1% of streamers. The other one is gaming as a profession. So with play to earn and play and earn and selling your digital items, this could literally be a full-time job and you could live well from this job. And I think this is a major shift in culture, because the previous notion was that if you're like playing for a long time, then you're kind of wasting your time and you could be doing other things or you could be working, but this is literally becoming a profession. So you have the play to earn part and you have the creator salary economy. Both of those combined could make it so that someone could technically like live off of this. Sort of what was a hobby previously is now a profession. The future is legacy IP. So getting, you know, the Harry Potters of the world, the sort of Disney of the world to come and do stuff in Web3. I think the importance of that is that it's a sign of confidence, and at the same time they do have like their fan base, and that fan base would be curious, you know, to sort of explore that. So they would be coming like with an audience, which is always a good way to get more people into the space. The future is seamless user onboarding. So, you know, MetaMask, Uniswap, PancakeSwap, bridging, all that would be happening on the back end. And they wouldn't even know that they've used, you know, all of these, you know, all of this sort of tools to do whatever they want to do. So this would be in the back end, and then they wouldn't have to be scared anymore. And then it just becomes easier for everyone. So the future is also AAA studios. So getting the AAA studios, which is kind of like legacy IP, but, you know, essentially this kind of guarantees quality, you know, like really good quality games to be in the space, and to like kind of shift that notion that Web3 games are not really good. Just to finish off this sort of presentation, yeah, so like what do we do at studios? We're working on our branding right now because a lot of people confuse Polygon and studio. So we are Polygon, but like we're their studio division. So we're kind of the creative arm of Polygon. We deal directly with the projects, we onboard projects, we find projects, and we sustain the current projects. I think the end goal ultimately is to create an economy within the ecosystem. So the way that we do that is like when we have, you know, these interactions, what do we offer as studios? So as an example, tech integration support with smart contracts. So we actually help them, we actually help the projects like with their, you know, any kind of tech questions, integration, like we would connect them with our team. Obviously, like there's documentation online, but we're here to also provide tech support as well. in-house marketing. So they would have direct access to our marketing teams, for social announcements or any sort of marketing endeavors that will have studios involved. The third one, I think, is the one that we're the most famous for, is investment and grants. So we have invested a lot in projects that are coming into the ecosystem and that are building on Polygon. And then we also have grants, for I don't want to say that the smaller projects, but I think the projects that need a boost, and we're here to do that because they are building on Polygon. Then we have gaming guilds. We work with a lot of guilds. We try to see what the trends are when we have new projects, so we can kind of discuss that with our guilds and kind of see what's their best go-to strategy. And it's just like an additional tool, and that's very specific for gaming. And then the last one is just the impromptu intros to ecosystem partners. And I think this is kind of like the best part of studios, is kind of like connecting everyone together so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Essentially, like, there's this notion that you need to do everything by yourself and you have to start from scratch. And like, there are tools that are actually built out that, they could work on or work with, and we provide that. So once we're in contact with them and they need to, meet so-and-so, or they need access to so-and-so, then it's sort of part of our mission to make sure that everyone is well connected together. All right, so thank you all for listening, and I'll open the panel to any questions that you guys might have.
Hey, Soufia, thank you so much for your presentation. As people kind of think of their questions, I've got a couple to start us off. You talked a bit about the kind of lack of quality in some of the games that are out there today, and it seems like there's maybe a moral hazard that game developers are facing, where you can look at like an NFT collection drop that has a roadmap that has gaming features somewhere out in the future, and see that they've raised a lot of money with a successful drop and the community that they build, whether or not they ever deliver on the kind of difficult and technical problem of building a game, and the kind of play and earn high quality game path has a lot more hard work up front, a lot more investment up front before you start earning that revenue. How do you foresee that playing out? And do you have any advice for folks who are making the choice between these different paths, and why it may be better to focus on building a more full-featured game first?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because I think the core of this question is accountability. Ultimately, what we've seen initially was that there was a lack of accountability. So they would release a roadmap and they would raise a lot of money, and then you would never hear from them again. And this is not good, because this kind of has cast, like, there was a shadow that was cast because of this, and it kind of questioned the credibility of these projects. So, for example, with ICOs previously, there was no kind of due diligence on the projects or who the projects were or the founding team members. With IDOs, initial DEX offering platforms, so we are kind of headed more towards having accountability. And like, this is a form of accountability, is verifying the project, having a call with the founding team members, and making sure that it's actually legit. So that this kind of forms, like one layer, like a filter. I mean, even if it's a small one, it's still a filter that we previously didn't have before. And I think the trend is to continue sort of on this path, of course, like without being too restrictive, because if we become too restrictive, then we're kind of back to the old days of, going to the VC and presenting. And so I think, yeah, kind of allowing room for creativity, but like room for, like being responsible, because at the end of the day, like, people will go and buy your tokens, people will go and buy your digital assets. So you just want to make sure that you're also protecting the buyers as well. But yeah, I think we're getting better, and we will continue to get better.
Another question I had was that when you talk about the difference between play to earn and play and earn, And I think there's also still the old school gamers who just want to play to have fun. These are all kind of audiences of gamers, segments of gamers that your game can try and target and build for. And I think many games are going to try and build for all of them. Do you have any advice or examples for how to address these different segments in a game that that can kind of keep the fun?
Well, the good news is that now we have a lot of Web3 games that have a free-to-play version. So if they really don't want to interact with the Web3 layer, and I call it a layer because it just, sits on top of the stack. So you can choose not to interact with that and just, if you love the game, just focus on the game, and like that can be fun for you. So yeah, like that does exist. As an advice, I think what I've been seeing lately is that, the games have been getting a lot more responsible in the sense where previously, like you could raise money or like do like drops without having any kind of progress at all. But now, like what I'm noticing is that there is some kind of accountability again, where there's something to show. Either they have a trailer, which is still not the best thing ever, but or they've built an MVP, or whatever stage they're at. It's not that they're here empty-handed raising money. Like they've been bootstrapping, doing some stuff, and then continuously keeping their community up to date about what they're doing.
So I know we've got a couple teams at our event that are directly in the gaming space. If they want to engage with any of the resources that you showed on your last slide, what is the best pathway for them to do that?
Oh, like to come to like Polygon? Yeah, just DM me.
All right, you
It's
heard it here.
so
Drop it
easy,
in Soufia's
so easy.
DMs.
It's so easy. Actually, I'll put my I don't know if anyone like knows my actual name. It says Cyborg Soufia here. That's my Telegram, but this is my TG handle if anyone has any questions after. Yeah, I mean it's super easy right now. I unfortunately was not here to like see the projects, but like depending on like whatever stage they're on, I mean we could, and if they're planning on moving to Polygon, then we are here to provide resources and assist.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Soufia, for your presentation and your time tonight. That wraps up our scheduled events for today.